Did your parents ever slut shame you? It started when I was 13 and wore a tank top to school. Dad spent the entire ride home lecturing me about modesty and respect, and how men couldn't control themselves around exposed bodies. It was weird because he'd never said anything like that to me before. The next day, he bought me a whole new wardrobe of long sleeves and pants. "This is how respectable girls dress," he said while throwing out all my summer clothes. Mom tried to argue, but he shut her down, saying he was protecting me from predators. The rules got stricter every few months. First, it was no shorts or skirts above the ankle. Then no form-fitting clothes even if they covered everything. He made me wear baggy sweaters in the middle of summer. Kids at school asked why I dressed like I was hiding my body, and I didn't know how to explain that my dad thought my figure was dangerous. "Your body causes tempting thoughts," he'd tell me. "It's your responsibility to prevent that." When I turned 14, he added new requirements. My hair had to be covered because it was too tempting. He bought me headscarves and made me wear them everywhere. "Hair is sexual," he explained like it was obvious. "Men shouldn't see it." Then came gloves because apparently my hands were provocative. Then thick socks because ankles were distracting. Layer by layer, I disappeared under fabric. And Dad had started going to those weekly men's meetings at that new community center downtown. He'd come back with pamphlets about female modesty and the dangers of exposed skin. "They're teaching me to be a better father," he'd tell Mom. Mom stopped arguing after he showed her statistics about assault rates that the group had given him. None of us knew the statistics were fake. By 15, I was wearing long dresses with long coats over them, plus headscarves and gloves. Full coverage. He started measuring my clothes with a ruler to ensure nothing was too tight. He'd inspect me before I left the house and send me back to change if he could see even the suggestion of my body's outline. "You're lucky I care enough to protect you," he'd say. Most fathers let their daughters run wild. One day he brought home a face covering. Not a medical mask, but a full veil that only showed my eyes. "The men at the center explained that faces cause the most temptation," he said. "Your features are too beautiful to be public." I refused to wear it. He grounded me for a month. Said I couldn't leave the house at all if I wouldn't cover my face. So I missed school while he attended more meetings and came back with stronger convictions. That's when I started investigating these meetings he was going to. I followed him one night and saw him enter this unmarked building downtown. Through the window, I could see dozens of men sitting in rows while someone gave a presentation. The projection screen showed diagrams of women's bodies with red zones marking areas that needed covering. The presenter was explaining how women's exposed skin literally poisoned men's minds. How civilization would collapse if women weren't properly contained. Dad was taking notes and nodding along. I researched the building's address and found out it was registered to something called the Brotherhood of Purity. Their website was password protected, but I found cached pages talking about returning to traditional values and protecting men from female corruption. They had chapters all over the country, specifically targeted fathers of teenage daughters. They were occult brainwashing men into controlling their daughters, and Dad had fallen for it. I tried showing Mom what I'd found, but she was too scared to confront him. "He's not the same person anymore," she whispered. "Those men have changed him." She admitted she'd been researching divorce lawyers but was terrified of what he might do. The Brotherhood had convinced him that mothers who didn't support modesty were unfit, and he'd already threatened to seek full custody if she interfered. When I was 16, Dad announced the new rule. I could no longer show my eyes. "They're windows to the soul," he said. "And your soul belongs to your future husband, not random men on the street." He'd brought home these mesh panels to go over my eyes so I could barely see out but no one could see in. I was going to be completely erased and turned into a walking piece of furniture. He'd gotten the idea from the Brotherhood's advanced teachings about ultimate female purity. I finally snapped and refused. I told him I knew about the Brotherhood. His face went cold. "They said you might resist," he said calmly. "They warned me about this." He pulled out his phone and started texting someone. Within an hour, 3 men from the Brotherhood showed up at our house. "Your daughter needs intervention," one of them said to my father. "We have a special program for resistant girls, a retreat where they learn proper submission." They were talking about taking me to some compound to brainwash me into accepting complete covering. Mom stands frozen by the couch while one of the Brotherhood men pulls out a folder and spreads photos across our coffee table. The pictures show a big building surrounded by tall fences and girls in full coverings walking in lines between structures. He taps the photos and explains how the retreat provides intensive education in proper female behavior and submission to male authority. I keep my phone in my jacket pocket with the voice recorder app running, making sure my hand stays relaxed so nobody notices. The second man adds that resistant girls usually spend 3 to 6 months at the facility, learning to accept their role, and some stay longer if they need extra guidance. Dad leans forward to look at the photos more closely and asks about the daily schedule. The third man describes wake-up calls at 5 in the morning, prayer sessions, modesty training, and lessons about female purity that last most of the day. Mom's face goes completely white, but she doesn't say anything. I watch the men's mouths move and force myself to breathe normally, while my phone captures every single word they're saying about the remote location in another state and how girls aren't allowed phone calls for the first month. Dad nods along like this all makes perfect sense and asks what paperwork he needs to complete. The first man says they'll bring consent forms tomorrow when they come to pick me up, and only one parent's signature is required by their program rules. I feel my stomach drop, but I keep my expression blank. The men stand up after about 20 minutes and shake Dad's hand, telling him he's making the right choice to protect his daughter's soul. They promise to arrive at 8 in the morning with transportation and the necessary documents. Dad walks them to the door, and I hear him thanking them for their guidance and support. Mom still hasn't moved from her spot near the couch. The front door closes, and Dad heads straight to his study without looking at either of us. I wait 30 seconds to make sure he's really gone before I move toward the kitchen where Mom has finally started walking. She grips the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turn completely white, and her whole body is shaking. I get close to her and whisper that I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. Her head snaps up and she looks at me with this mix of total fear and desperate hope in her eyes. I show her the recording file on my phone screen and she puts her hand over her mouth. We both understand without saying it out loud that tomorrow morning is the absolute deadline. Mom glances toward Dad's study and mouths the words, "Your room," before walking away quickly. I go upstairs and close my bedroom door, then lie down on my bed fully dressed on top of the covers. I hide my phone under my pillowcase and stare at the ceiling. Around 9 o'clock, I hear Dad's footsteps in the hallway, and I close my eyes pretending to sleep. He walks past my door and I hear him go into his bedroom. An hour later, his footsteps come back and he walks slowly past my door again like he's checking on me. This happens every single hour through the night. Around midnight, I hear his voice through the wall talking on the phone, and I recognize Philip's name. Dad discusses logistics about tomorrow morning and mentions something about parental consent forms that don't require both signatures under certain circumstances. My heart starts pounding really hard, but I force myself to breathe slowly and quietly. I need to think and plan, but my mind keeps jumping to images of that fenced facility and girls walking in lines. I stay completely still under my covers and listen to Dad's footsteps patrol the hallway 2 more times before dawn starts showing through my window. At 6 in the morning, I hear a soft tap on my door and Mom's voice saying she's checking if I'm awake for school. Dad's in the bathroom, so she opens my door a crack and mouths the words, "I'll drive you," without making any sound. She slips her hand through the gap and passes me an old phone I've never seen before. I grab it and she closes the door quickly. I turn on the old phone and see it's already set up with a number. I open my regular phone and text the recording file to the new phone's number as a backup copy. Then I delete the file from my regular phone completely, in case Dad checks it later. Both of us are moving in total silence and buying whatever time we can. I get dressed and pack my school bag, then wait in my room until I hear Mom's voice downstairs saying something about breakfast. I come down and Dad is already at the kitchen table drinking coffee. He looks at me and says he wants to drive me to the school himself this morning so we can talk about tomorrow's opportunity. Mom jumps in immediately with a lie about needing to stop at the pharmacy on the way to pick up a prescription. Dad looks annoyed but agrees and tells her to come straight home after she drops me off. I can see him standing at the living room window watching as we get in Mom's car and pull away from the house. Mom's hands are shaking so bad on the steering wheel that the car drifts a little before she corrects it. I tell her to drop me at the side entrance near the counseling offices instead of the main front doors. She looks confused, so I explain I need to turn in a paper early to a teacher. She nods and drives around to the side of the school building. The moment her car turns the corner and disappears, I run through the side doors and head straight down the hallway toward the counseling office section. I'm praying that Talia Roberts is already here this early. I turn the corner and see light coming from under her office door. I knock and hear her voice say, "Come in." Talia takes one look at my face and immediately closes her office door behind me. I pull out Mom's old phone and play her the recording of the Brotherhood Men, describing the retreat program and the timeline and the consent forms. Her expression changes from normal concern to serious alarm while she listens. She asks me directly if I'm safe going home today, and I tell her no, that they're planning to pick me up tomorrow morning at 8. She grabs her phone off her desk and starts making a call. Within 20 minutes, I'm sitting in a conference room with Talia and her supervisor, a woman with gray hair who introduces herself, but I'm too scared to remember her name. They listen to the full recording twice while I explain the whole timeline starting from when I was 13 and wore a tank top to the school. I tell them about the Brotherhood meetings Dad attends and how the rules got worse every few months, and the other girls at the school who came forward with similar stories. They ask specific questions about whether Dad has ever hit me, and I say no, but tell them about the month-long grounding when I refused the face veil. I describe the ruler measurements and the confiscated clothes and how Dad inspects me before I leave the house. Talia's supervisor asks detailed questions about the other girls, and I give her their names. Talia explains that she's legally required to report this to Child Protective Services, because the retreat threat means Dad is planning to isolate me from the school and potentially subject me to psychological abuse. Her supervisor is already on the phone with someone while Talia helps me write down everything I can remember with specific dates and details about each restriction Dad added. I feel totally exposed sitting there telling strangers about my life, but I also feel relieved that adults are finally listening and taking it seriously. My phone buzzes in my pocket, but I ignore it. About an hour after we started, Talia's desk phone rings and she answers it, then hands it to me saying it's a CPS caseworker named Jamal Perez, who needs to speak with me directly. I take the phone and hear a calm male voice asking me specific questions about the retreat timeline and whether my father has physically prevented me from leaving the house before. I tell him about the grounding and how Dad wouldn't let me go to the school for a whole month. Jamal asks if I feel safe going home today, and I say no without hesitating. Jamal's voice comes through the phone calm and steady, telling me he's opening an emergency investigation right now and he'll try to get to the school today to meet with me in person. He says in the meantime I need to stay at the school and not leave with anyone except my mother or someone from CPS, and he gives me his direct cell number to call if anything happens. Talia leans closer and adds that the school has a safety protocol for students in danger, where they can keep me here past normal dismissal time if needed. And I feel this huge weight lift off my chest knowing I won't be forced into a car with those Brotherhood men. Jamal tells me to forward him any texts or calls I get from my father or anyone connected to the Brotherhood. Then he hangs up to start making calls to other people in the CPS system. Talia walks me back to first period and I slip into my seat trying to look normal, even though my hands are still shaking. The teacher glances at me but doesn't say anything, and I spend the whole class period staring at my notebook pretending to take notes while my mind races through everything that just happened. When the bell rings for second period, I'm walking down the hallway when my phone starts buzzing in my pocket, and I pull it out to see 3 texts from Dad asking why I'm not answering his calls, and saying the Brotherhood men will pick me up after school for a tour of the facility, so I can see it's not scary. My stomach drops, but I remember what Jamal said, so I open each text and take screenshots of everything. Then I forward all of them to the number Jamal gave me with a message saying, "These just came in." Talia told me not to respond to Dad at all, so I turn my phone completely off and shove it back in my pocket. Then I head to second period trying to focus on anything except the fact that Dad thinks I'm still going to that retreat. By the time lunch rolls around, I'm so anxious I can barely eat, but Talia pulls me out of the cafeteria before I even sit down and brings me back to her office. She closes the door and tells me that Jamal is coming to the school at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and that my mom has been contacted and she's cooperating with CPS, which makes me feel relieved because I was worried Mom might panic and side with Dad. Talia also mentions that the school principal has been briefed on the situation, and security has been told not to release me to anyone except CPS or my mother. And hearing that makes me feel safer, but also scared about what happens after today when I can't just hide at the school anymore. I eat my lunch in Talia's office while she does paperwork, and then I go to my afternoon classes trying to act normal, even though nothing feels normal. During 6th period, a student aide comes to the door with a note for my teacher, and she calls my name and tells me to go to the main conference room. My heart starts pounding as I walk down the hallway wondering if something went wrong, but when I get there, Talia is waiting outside and she smiles at me in a way that's supposed to be reassuring. Inside the conference room, there's a man sitting at the table who stands up when I come in, and he's younger than I expected, maybe 30, with dark hair and a calm way of moving that makes me feel a little less nervous. He introduces himself as Jamal Perez and shakes my hand. Then he asks if it's okay if he records our conversation, and I say yes. Talia sits down next to me while Jamal sets up his phone to record, and then he asks me to play the Brotherhood recording again while he takes notes on a yellow legal pad. I pull out Mom's old phone and play the whole thing, watching his face stay neutral and professional even when the men on the recording talk about the retreat being months long and teaching proper submission. When it's done, he asks me specific questions about when Dad first started the clothing restrictions and how they got worse over time, and I walk him through everything from the tank top at 13 all the way to the mesh eye panels. Jamal writes everything down in neat handwriting, and then he looks up at me and asks detailed questions about my mother's level of involvement and whether she participated in enforcing the restrictions or tried to protect me. I explain that Mom has been really scared of losing custody because Dad threatened that the Brotherhood would help him prove she's unfit, but she's been researching divorce lawyers quietly, and recently she started taking photos of things as documentation. Jamal nods and writes more notes. Then he says that matters a lot for his assessment because it shows Mom is trying to protect me even though she's afraid. He asks if Mom has ever hit me or restricted food or locked me in my room, and I say no. She's never done anything like that. It's all been Dad and the Brotherhood's influence on him. Jamal closes his notebook and tells me he's going to recommend emergency protective measures and that he needs to speak with my mother today to create a safety plan. Right then, Talia's phone rings and she answers it, and I watch her face change from calm to concerned. She hangs up and tells Jamal that the front office just called because my father is here demanding to pick me up early and claiming there's a family emergency. My whole body goes cold and I look at Jamal, who immediately picks up his phone and calls the front desk himself. He identifies himself as the CPS caseworker on an active investigation and instructs them to tell my father that I've already been picked up by my mother for a medical appointment. And even from across the room, I can hear Dad's voice getting louder through the phone speaker. Talia and I sit frozen while Jamal handles it, his voice staying calm and professional while he explains that CPS has the authority to prevent removal of a minor during an active investigation. He hangs up and tells the front desk to call him immediately if my father doesn't leave, and then we wait in tense silence for about 5 minutes before Talia's phone rings again. Security reports that Dad is refusing to leave the building and demanding to see me, saying I'm his daughter, and no one can keep him from me. So Jamal calls the police non-emergency line and explains there's a custody dispute in progress with CPS involvement and a parent who won't leave school property. I sit there feeling like I might throw up while we wait for the police to arrive, and Talia moves her chair closer to mine like she's trying to shield me from something. About 15 minutes later, Talia gets another call saying 2 officers have arrived, and they're talking to Dad in the front office, and Jamal suggests we move to Talia's office, which has a window overlooking the parking lot so we can see when he leaves. We walk down the hallway quickly and quietly, and from Talia's window I watch Dad finally come out of the building with the 2 police officers walking behind him. His face is bright red and I can see him gesturing angrily while one officer talks to him, and then he gets in his car and drives away fast, his tires squealing a little as he turns out of the parking lot. Jamal tells me that the officers informed Dad that CPS has the authority to prevent removal during an active investigation, and that he needs to cooperate or face legal consequences, and I feel this weird mix of relief and fear, because I know Dad is going to be even angrier now. I turn my phone back on, and immediately it starts going crazy with notifications, calls, and texts from Dad, demanding to know where I am and accusing Mom of poisoning my mind against him and the Brotherhood. The texts get more and more frantic, saying I'm in danger from secular influences, and Mom is destroying our family, and he's going to file for full custody to save me. Jamal takes my phone and photographs each message carefully. Then he tells me to keep my phone off until we have a safety plan in place because Dad, knowing I'm reading his messages, might make him escalate further. He says he's arranging for Mom to meet us at a neutral location, so we can all talk together about next steps, and he makes some calls while Talia and I sit quietly in her office. About 20 minutes later, Jamal tells me he's going to drive me to the public library where Mom is going to meet us, and we leave through a side door of the school to avoid anyone seeing us. In his car, I sit in the back seat feeling numb and scared, watching the familiar streets go by and wondering what's going to happen next. When we pull into the library parking lot, I see Mom's car already there, and the moment we park, she jumps out and runs over to us. I get out and she hugs me so hard I can barely breathe, her whole body shaking and tears streaming down her face. She keeps saying she's sorry over and over, and I hug her back, telling her it's okay, even though nothing feels okay. Jamal gives us a minute and then suggests we go inside to somewhere private where we can talk. So we walk into the library, and he asks the librarian if there's a study room available. She leads us to a small room in the back with a table and chairs, and closes the door behind us, and Mom and I sit down next to each other while Jamal sits across from us. Mom tells Jamal that Dad has been calling her non-stop since he couldn't find me at the school, and she plays some of the voicemails for us where Dad is threatening to file for full custody immediately if she doesn't bring me home and stop interfering with his parental rights. Jamal listens to each one and then tells Mom that's actually helpful evidence of his controlling behavior and his inability to respect boundaries or legal authority. He pulls out some papers and a folder from his bag, and then he starts explaining the CPS process and what our options are going forward. He says he can file for emergency removal, which would place me in foster care temporarily, while the investigation continues, or he can work with Mom to create a safety plan if she's willing to separate from Dad immediately and refuse to allow the retreat to happen. Mom doesn't even hesitate before saying she'll do whatever it takes to keep me safe, and Jamal looks relieved like he was hoping she'd say that. He pulls out a notebook and starts writing down details while explaining what happens next. Mom and I need to stay somewhere Dad doesn't know about tonight, and Mom has to promise not to tell him or anyone connected to the Brotherhood where we are. Tomorrow morning, we'll meet Jamal at his office for a formal home assessment where he'll document everything officially. He tears off a page from his notebook and writes down a phone number, sliding it across the table to Mom. That's the domestic violence hotline, he says, and if Dad shows up wherever we're staying or threatens us in any way, we call 911 first, and then call that number. Mom folds the paper carefully and puts it in her wallet, her hands still shaking slightly. She asks Jamal about her legal rights and whether Dad can force us to come home. And Jamal explains that she has every right to leave with me, and that he's recommending she talk to a family law attorney as soon as possible to start the custody process. The problem is we don't have anywhere to go tonight. Mom admits this quietly, looking embarrassed, and I realize she hasn't told anyone about what's been happening at home. Jamal nods like he expected this and pulls out his phone, scrolling through contacts before making a call. He steps away from the table slightly and talks in a low voice to someone, explaining that he has a mother and teenage daughter who need emergency shelter tonight due to domestic situation involving an extremist organization. After a few minutes, he comes back and tells us there's a local women's shelter that takes mothers with older children, and they have space available tonight. They also have security protocols in place since this involves an organization rather than just one person, which means they can handle the extra risk. Relief washes over Mom's face and she thanks Jamal repeatedly. He gives us the address and tells us to go there directly, but Mom and I should leave the library separately from him in case Dad is watching and tries to follow him to find us. We agree, and Jamal packs up his papers, telling us he'll see us tomorrow morning at 10. Mom and I wait in the study room for 5 minutes after he leaves. Then we walk out to the parking lot and get in her car. The drive home feels dangerous, even though we're just going to grab our stuff. Mom keeps checking the rearview mirror to make sure no one is following us, and I watch every car that passes, wondering if Dad or someone from the Brotherhood might spot us. When we pull into our neighborhood, Mom drives past our house first to make sure Dad's car isn't there. The driveway is empty. We park on the street 2 houses down and practically run to the front door, Mom fumbling with her keys because her hands are shaking so badly. Inside, the house feels different now, like enemy territory instead of home. We move fast through the rooms, throwing clothes and toiletries into 2 suitcases without bothering to fold anything. Mom goes to her closet and pulls out a folder she's been hiding behind her shoe boxes, the one with copies of our birth certificates, social security cards, insurance papers, and the divorce lawyer research she's been doing. She stuffs it all into her purse. Then she walks around the house with her phone, taking pictures of everything Dad has collected. She photographs my closet full of the required clothing, the long dresses and coats and headscarves all hanging in rows. She takes close-ups of the mesh eye panels Dad bought, still in their package on my dresser where he left them yesterday. She goes into Dad's study and photographs the ruler he uses to measure my clothes, making sure to get the hash marks he's made on it to track acceptable lengths. Then she photographs the stack of Brotherhood pamphlets on his desk, spreading them out so the titles are visible. I stand in the doorway watching her document everything, feeling strange about turning our home into evidence. We're in and out in 20 minutes like Jamal told us. Mom locks the door behind us and we load the suitcases into the trunk, and then we're driving away from the house where I've lived my whole life, not knowing when or if I'll be back. The shelter is across town in a part of the city I've never been to before. We follow the GPS to an address that turns out to be behind a tall security gate with cameras mounted on the posts. Mom pulls up to the intercom and presses the button, and a woman's voice asks for her name. Mom gives it and the gate slides open slowly. Inside the compound, there's a parking lot and a plain 2-story building that could be anything from the outside. We park and carry our suitcases to the entrance where a staff member is waiting. She introduces herself and leads us inside to a small office where another woman asks us detailed questions while typing on a computer. She wants to know what kind of car Dad drives, the make and model and color and license plate number. She asks if he has any law enforcement connections or friends who are cops. She asks if he's ever been violent or if he owns guns. Mom answers everything as accurately as she can while I sit there feeling exposed and scared. When the intake is done, the staff member gives us keys to a room on the 2nd floor and explains the rules. We can't tell anyone where we are, not friends or family or anyone. We can't post on social media or check in anywhere on our phones. The doors stay locked at all times, and there are cameras covering all the entrances. If we see Dad or anyone from the Brotherhood anywhere near the shelter, we come inside immediately and tell staff. Mom and I follow her upstairs to a small room with 2 twin beds, a dresser, and a bathroom. It's basic but clean, and it has a lock on the door. The staff member leaves us alone, and Mom sits down on one of the beds and just breaks. She cries so hard her whole body shakes, all the fear and stress of the past few years finally coming out. I sit next to her and put my arm around her shoulders, and we stay like that for a long time. That night, Mom's phone starts ringing and doesn't stop. She's turned off the sound, but we can see the screen lighting up over and over with Dad's name. The calls keep coming, one after another, and when Mom checks after the first hour, there are already 23 missed calls. Then the voicemails start. Mom puts the phone on speaker and plays the first one. Dad's voice fills the room, begging Mom to bring me home and promising everything will be okay if we just come back tonight. The second voicemail is angrier, accusing Mom of poisoning my mind and destroying our family. The third one threatens to file for full custody and prove Mom is an unfit mother who's putting me in danger by rejecting God's plan. They go on like this, swinging between desperate pleading and cold threats. And by the time we stop listening, there are voicemails from Philip too, talking about how we're being corrupted by secular influences and need spiritual intervention. Mom saves every single message as evidence, her face getting harder and more determined with each one. She counts the missed calls when they finally stop around midnight. 63 calls in 5 hours. I try to sleep, but every sound in the hallway makes me jump, my body tense and ready to run. I keep thinking Dad somehow found us and is coming through the door. Mom can't sleep either. I can hear her breathing in the dark, awake and alert. Morning finally comes and we're still safe. At 8 o'clock, Jamal calls Mom's phone to confirm our appointment at the CPS office at 10. Mom spends the next hour getting ready and practicing what she's going to say to him. She's terrified they'll judge her for not leaving Dad sooner, for letting things get this bad before taking action. I tell her that Jamal already knows the situation and he's on our side, but she's still nervous. We arrive at the CPS office at 9:45 and check in at the front desk. Jamal comes out to meet us and takes us back to a conference room. He explains that he needs to interview us separately, so we each feel comfortable speaking freely. He takes Mom first while I wait in a different room, and 45 minutes later they come back and it's my turn. Jamal sits across from me with a notepad and asks me to tell him everything from the very beginning. I start with the tank top incident when I was 13, Dad's lecture in the car about modesty and men not being able to control themselves. Then I walk him through every stage of the restrictions, how they got stricter every few months, the elimination of shorts and tank tops, then the requirement for long sleeves and pants even in summer, the headscarves at 14 because hair was sexual, the gloves and thick socks because hands and ankles were tempting, the measurements with a ruler to make sure nothing was too tight. I tell him about Dad's weekly meetings at the Brotherhood and how he'd come home with pamphlets about female purity. I describe following Dad one night and seeing the presentation with the diagrams of women's bodies marked with red zones that needed covering. I explain how I researched the Brotherhood online and found out they were specifically targeting fathers of teenage daughters. Then I tell him about the face veil Dad brought home and how I refused to wear it, which led to being grounded for a month and missing school. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I describe my investigation into the Brotherhood and trying to show Mom what I found, but her being too scared to confront Dad because he'd threatened to seek full custody. Finally, I tell him about the mesh eye panels and my refusal, and the 3 Brotherhood men showing up at our house to talk about the retreat for resistant girls. Jamal asks if Dad has ever hit me, and I say no. He's never been physically violent. But the control has been constant and suffocating. The feeling of disappearing under all those layers of fabric and rules. Jamal writes everything down and then looks up at me and says he believes me. Those 2 words make me want to cry with relief. He takes me back to the conference room where Mom is waiting, and then he sits down with both of us together. He's made his assessment based on our interviews and the evidence Mom collected. He's classifying what Dad has done as psychological abuse and risk of educational neglect because of the retreat plan to remove me from the school. He's recommending that Mom maintain physical custody of me, while Dad only gets supervised visitation until he completes a psychological evaluation. He's also filing a report about the Brotherhood's practices with the state so they can investigate whether other families are being affected. Mom starts crying again, but this time it's relief. Jamal explains the next step, which is filing for a temporary protective order that would legally prevent Dad from taking me out of school or out of the state. He knows a legal aid attorney who handles emergency custody cases, and he's going to connect us with her. He makes a call right there in the conference room and talks to someone briefly before hanging up and telling us the attorney can meet with us this afternoon. Her name is Miranda Wallace, and she's agreed to see us at 3 o'clock. Everything is moving so fast, but we need it to move fast because Dad knows we're gone, and the Brotherhood might be helping him look for us. We leave the CPS office, and Mom drives us to a coffee shop where we kill time until the meeting with Miranda. At 3, we arrive at the legal aid office, and Miranda meets us in a small conference room. She's maybe 40 with kind eyes and a professional manner that makes me feel like we're in good hands. Mom plays the recording I made of the Brotherhood men talking about the retreat, and Miranda listens to the whole thing without interrupting. Then she reviews Jamal's report and looks through all the photos Mom took yesterday, the required clothing and the mesh eye panels and the ruler and the Brotherhood pamphlets. She spreads the photos out on the table and studies them carefully. When she's done, she looks up at us and says we have a strong case for emergency protective orders. The evidence is clear and documented. But she warns us that Dad will almost certainly claim religious freedom and parental rights. He'll argue that he has the right to raise me according to his beliefs about modesty and purity. The court will have to balance my safety and autonomy against his constitutional rights. Miranda says she needs to file the petition today to get a hearing scheduled within 72 hours, which means we might be in court as early as Friday. Miranda starts typing on her laptop while asking Mom specific questions about the Brotherhood's organization and whether they provide any support services to members. Mom mentions that Dad once told her the Brotherhood has lawyers on retainer who help fathers maintain authority over their families when mothers try to interfere. Miranda's expression darkens and she stops typing to look at us directly, saying that makes them significantly more dangerous because they have resources and experience, but it also means there's a paper trail of their activities that could be useful for the state investigation. She goes back to typing faster, pulling up case templates and filling in details from our situation. By 3:30, she's printed out the petition and has me and Mom review it to make sure all the facts are accurate. The document lists everything in cold legal language, describing the retreat as unlawful restraint and the clothing requirements as psychological abuse. Seeing it all written out officially makes it feel more real and more terrifying at the same time. Miranda makes a few final edits based on our feedback, and then she's uploading the petition to the court's electronic filing system. She hits submit at exactly 4 o'clock, and then we wait. Her phone rings 45 minutes later and she answers, listening intently before thanking someone and hanging up. The judge's clerk scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning at 9, which means Dad will be served with notice tonight and has the right to appear with an attorney to respond to our petition. Miranda warns us that Dad will almost certainly bring Brotherhood support, and we need to be prepared for them to paint Mom as an unfit parent who's destroying the family's religious values and corrupting me against my father. She says their strategy will be to claim religious freedom and parental rights, making this look like Mom interfering with Dad's constitutional right to raise his daughter according to his beliefs. We need to stay focused on the retreat threat and the escalating control, not get pulled into debates about religion itself. Back at the shelter that evening, Mom and I spread out all our evidence on the small table in our room and start preparing for tomorrow. We write down key points in chronological order, starting with the tank top incident when I was 13 and going through every restriction Dad added over the years. Mom organizes the photos she took of my required clothing, the mesh eye panels, the ruler Dad used for measurements, and the Brotherhood pamphlets. We practice what we'll say if we're called to testify, keeping our answers short and factual like Miranda instructed. Around 7 o'clock, Mom's phone rings from an unknown number and she hesitates before declining the call. It rings again 2 minutes later from a different unknown number. This time she answers and puts it on speaker, and a man's voice introduces himself as a family counselor with the Brotherhood, who wants to help mediate this situation before it goes to court. Miranda already warned us about this exact tactic, so Mom tells him we're not interested in mediation and hangs up. He calls back immediately, but she blocks the number. Her hands are shaking and I can see she's scared they're already mobilizing against us. At 8 o'clock, Mom gets a text from the process server confirming that Dad was served with the protective order petition at the house. We both stare at her phone, knowing Dad now knows we're taking legal action, and that the hearing is tomorrow morning. Less than 5 minutes later, her phone rings again, and this time the caller ID shows a name, Philip Redmond. Mom's face goes pale, but she answers and immediately puts it on speaker while opening her voice recorder app. Philip's voice comes through smooth and practiced, the kind of voice that's used to convincing people of things. He tells Mom she's making a terrible mistake that will destroy her daughter's soul and tear apart her family. He says that God has a plan for female purity, and that by rejecting the Brotherhood's teachings, Mom is condemning me to a life of corruption and sin. He talks about how the retreat is a beautiful opportunity for spiritual growth, and that resistance is just evidence of how much I need the program. His words are manipulative and calculated, wrapping control in religious language to make it sound holy. Mom's jaw tightens and she interrupts him to say that she knows what the Brotherhood really is, and that she's protecting her daughter from psychological abuse, not religious teaching. Philip's voice shifts slightly, becoming harder, and he warns her that the Brotherhood has helped many fathers maintain custody when mothers tried to interfere with proper child rearing. He says they have lawyers and resources and that she's going to lose. Mom tells him not to contact her again and hangs up, then immediately saves the recording and texts it to Miranda. Her hands won't stop shaking. I can't sleep that night, lying in the narrow shelter bed while my mind races through every possible worst-case scenario. What if the judge sides with Dad because he claims religious freedom? What if I'm forced to go to the retreat anyway and they won't let me leave? What if Mom loses custody and I end up living with Dad under even stricter control? The thoughts spiral and spiral until I'm breathing too fast and feeling dizzy. Mom hears me and comes over to sit on the edge of my bed, taking my hand in the dark. She asks what I'm thinking about, and I tell her I'm scared the judge won't believe us, or will think Dad has the right to do whatever he wants because of religion. Mom squeezes my hand and says she's scared too, but she promises me that even if the worst happens and she loses custody tomorrow, she will never stop fighting to get me back. She'll appeal, she'll file more petitions, she'll do whatever it takes for however long it takes. Her voice is steady and determined in a way I haven't heard in years, and somehow that helps calm the panic in my chest. We talk for another hour about backup plans, and what we'll do if things go wrong, and eventually I fall asleep still holding her hand. Morning comes too fast and we're both exhausted, but we get dressed and ready by 7:30. Miranda texts that she's already at the courthouse and will meet us at the main entrance at 8:30 to prep before the 9 o'clock hearing. The shelter staff wish us luck as we leave and remind us we can come back regardless of what happens today. At the courthouse, Miranda is waiting with a leather folder full of documents, and she takes us to a small conference room near the courtroom. She explains exactly what will happen during the hearing, how the judge will hear from both sides and review all the evidence before making a decision about temporary custody and visitation. The goal right now is just to get orders in place that keep me safe with Mom while the full custody case proceeds through the system, which will take months. She warns us again that Dad probably has an attorney by now, and that the Brotherhood might have provided one, which means they'll be prepared and aggressive. We need to stay calm and stick to the facts no matter what they say. Miranda reviews the key points one more time, and then it's 8:55 and we have to go into the courtroom. The courtroom is smaller than I expected, with wooden benches and a raised platform where the judge will sit. Dad is already there on the opposite side with a man in an expensive suit who must be his lawyer, and Philip sits in the gallery right behind them. Dad won't look at me or Mom, his jaw tight and his hands clenched on the table in front of him. Philip stares at us with an expression that's supposed to look concerned but just seems cold. Other people file in, a court reporter and the judge's clerk, and then everyone stands as the judge enters. She's a woman maybe in her 50s with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. My heart hammers against my ribs so hard I think everyone can hear it. The judge sits and tells everyone else to sit. Then she reviews the case number and confirms who's present. Miranda stands and introduces herself as our attorney, and the man in the expensive suit introduces himself as representing Dad. The judge asks if both sides are ready to proceed and they both say yes. Miranda presents our case first, starting with a brief statement about the escalating control and the immediate threat of the retreat. Then she plays the recording I made of the Brotherhood men describing the retreat program, and the courtroom is completely silent while their voices talk about resistant girls and submission training. When it's done, Miranda enters the recording into evidence along with printed transcripts. Next, she shows the photos Mom took, passing them to the judge one by one. The required clothing with all the layers, the mesh eye panels that would have covered my eyes, the ruler Dad used to measure my clothes, the Brotherhood pamphlets about female purity. The judge studies each photo carefully without any expression. Miranda then enters Jamal's CPS report and summarizes his findings about psychological abuse and risk of educational neglect. Finally, she calls Mom to testify, and Mom walks to the witness stand looking terrified but determined. Miranda asks her simple questions about when the restrictions started, how they escalated over time, and what Dad said about the retreat. Mom's voice shakes, but she gets through it, describing how Dad threatened to seek full custody if she interfered, and how the Brotherhood convinced him that mothers who don't support total modesty are unfit parents. When Miranda is done, Dad's attorney declines to cross-examine Mom, and she returns to sit next to me. Dad's attorney stands and immediately goes on the offensive, arguing that this is fundamentally a religious freedom issue, and that Dad has the constitutional right to raise his daughter according to his sincerely held beliefs about modesty and purity. He claims the retreat is a voluntary educational program focused on religious instruction, not a prison or brainwashing facility, and that Mom is alienating me from my father by making false allegations of abuse when no physical harm has occurred. He argues that modest dress requirements are common in many religious traditions, and that Dad shouldn't be punished for following his faith. He suggests that Mom is the one causing harm by undermining Dad's parental authority and exposing me to secular influences that contradict our family's values. The judge listens to all of this without any expression, occasionally making notes but not interrupting. When Dad's attorney finishes, the judge looks at the evidence in front of her for a long moment. Then the judge speaks directly to Dad, asking him to stand and answer some questions under oath. Dad stands and confirms his identity and that he understands he's under oath. The judge asks him directly whether he intended to send me to the retreat against my will, and Dad hesitates for several seconds before answering that he believed it was necessary for my spiritual development and protection from worldly corruption. The judge follows up by asking if he would have accepted my refusal to go to the retreat, and Dad says that children don't always know what's best for them, and that parents have to make difficult decisions for their children's own good. The judge makes a note and asks if he considers the mesh eye covering requirement reasonable, and Dad explains that it's based on religious teachings about modesty, and that he was only trying to protect me. The judge asks one more question about whether he believes mothers have equal authority to fathers in parenting decisions, and Dad hesitates again before saying that men are called to be spiritual heads of their households. The judge thanks him and tells him to sit down. Then she reviews her notes for what feels like forever, while the courtroom stays completely silent. Miranda stands and calls my name, asking me to take the witness stand. I walk forward on shaky legs and sit in the chair next to the judge's bench, while the court officer asks me to state my name for the record. Miranda approaches, and her voice is calm when she asks if I want to go to the retreat my father mentioned. I say no. She asks if I feel safe with my father, and I say no again. She asks if I've been allowed to refuse the clothing restrictions he's imposed, and I say no a third time, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. Dad's attorney stands up quickly and objects, claiming Miranda is leading the witness, but the judge tells him to sit down and allows the testimony to continue. Miranda asks me to explain in my own words what I want, and I take a breath before saying that I'm not against modesty if someone chooses it for themselves, but I want the choice to be mine instead of forced on me through threats and punishments. The judge writes something down and nods at Miranda, who thanks me and returns to her seat. The judge looks at me directly and asks if my father has ever physically harmed me. I say no. He hasn't hit me or hurt me that way. She asks me to describe what happened when I refused to wear the face veil, and I explain the month-long grounding where I couldn't leave the house or go to the school, and how he checks my clothes with a ruler every morning to make sure nothing is too tight, and how he watches me constantly to make sure I'm following all his rules. The judge asks if I believe my father would respect a court order that limited his authority over my clothing choices, and I pause because I want to be honest. I tell her I don't know because the Brotherhood keeps telling him that he's right, and that mothers and daughters who resist are corrupted, so I'm not sure if a court order would matter more to him than what they say. That answer seems to land with the judge because she writes several lines in her notes and her expression gets more serious. She thanks me and tells me I can return to my seat, and I walk back to sit next to Mom, my hands shaking now that it's over. The judge announces a brief recess and leaves through the door behind her bench, and everyone in the courtroom starts whispering. Miranda leans over and tells us the judge is making her decision now, and we just have to wait. 15 minutes pass that feel like hours, and then the bailiff tells everyone to rise because the judge is returning. She sits down and looks at both sides before speaking, her voice clear and firm as she announces that she's granting a temporary protective order. She says that Mom will have physical custody of me, that Dad's visitation will be supervised only, and that there will be no contact between me and any members of the Brotherhood of Purity, including any attendance at their retreat program. She adds that Dad will be required to undergo a psychological evaluation focused on coercive control and manipulation. Dad's face goes bright red and he starts to stand up, but his attorney puts a hand on his arm to stop him. Philip Redmond stands up in the gallery behind Dad and storms out of the courtroom, his footsteps loud in the sudden silence. The judge continues talking, saying she's also ordering family therapy for our family, and that Dad's visitation will remain supervised until both the therapist and CPS determine it's safe to expand his time with me. She extends the no-travel order, which means Dad cannot take me out of state or enroll me in any residential programs without court approval. Miranda reaches under the table and squeezes my hand, and I squeeze back because we won this round even though I know Dad will fight it. The judge dismisses us and everyone stands as she leaves, and then Miranda starts gathering her papers while telling us we need to leave quickly before Dad tries to approach. We walk toward the exit and Dad does try to come over to us, but his attorney grabs his arm and pulls him back toward their table. I hear Philip's voice from the hallway telling Dad they'll appeal this decision and fight this religious persecution all the way up. Mom and I follow Miranda through a side exit that leads to a different hallway, and we practically run to the parking garage where her car is parked. Once we're all inside with the doors locked, Mom finally lets herself cry, her whole body shaking with relief and exhaustion. I feel numb more than anything else, like my brain can't quite process that we're actually safe now, but I'm grateful for the judge's decision and for Miranda's help. That afternoon, while we're back at the shelter, Jamal calls Mom's phone to say he's received copies of the court orders and everything is official now. He tells us he'll conduct a follow-up visit next week to make sure we're stable and have what we need. He also mentions that the state is opening an investigation into the Brotherhood of Purity's practices regarding minors, especially their retreat program, because our case raised red flags about potential child abuse. He says it might not lead anywhere since these investigations move slowly, but at least the Brotherhood is on their radar now. Mom thanks him and hangs up, then sits down on the bed looking exhausted but relieved. The shelter staff tells us we can stay for 2 more weeks while Mom searches for temporary housing we can afford on just her income. She's already applied for emergency assistance through the county and has a meeting scheduled with a divorce attorney next week to start the formal proceedings to end her marriage. The reality of rebuilding our entire lives is overwhelming and scary, but it's also necessary if we want to stay safe and free. 3 days later, a letter arrives at the shelter for Mom, delivered through Dad's attorney. The letter requests a supervised visit with me, which the court order allows him to do. Mom and I sit together in our room discussing whether I'm ready to see him, and I think about it for a long time before deciding that I want to try. Part of me hopes that maybe seeing the real consequences of his actions will make him reconsider the Brotherhood's influence on his thinking. We call the Family Services Center and schedule a visit for the following week with a supervisor present to monitor everything. When the day arrives, Mom drives me to the center and waits in the lobby while I go into a small room with plain walls and basic furniture. Dad is already sitting at a table with a woman in professional clothes sitting in the corner with a notepad. The supervisor introduces herself and explains the rules, then tells us we can talk. Dad asks how I am, and I say fine, my voice flat. Then he starts talking about how he only wanted to protect me and keep me pure from the corruption in the world. I interrupt him and say that control isn't the same thing as protection, and he goes quiet, staring at his hands on the table. The silence stretches out between us, awkward and heavy. Dad tries again, explaining that the Brotherhood taught him the right way to raise daughters in a corrupt world where women are constantly attacked and objectified. I ask him directly if he thinks I'm corrupted, and he opens his mouth but no words come out. He can't answer the question. The supervisor speaks up when Dad starts quoting something from scripture about female submission and obedience, reminding him firmly that the court specifically ordered no religious coercion during these visits. Dad looks genuinely confused, like he can't understand where the line is anymore between his faith and the Brotherhood's teachings. I watch his face and feel sad more than angry, because I can see that he really believes what they told him, and he doesn't know how to separate their lies from the truth anymore. Mom rides home from those visits are quiet at first, Mom asking how it went, and me giving short answers because I'm still processing Dad's confusion and the gap between what he believed and what's real. Over the next few weeks, Dad keeps showing up for his supervised visits, and something starts shifting in how he talks to me. Instead of launching into explanations about purity or what the Brotherhood taught him, he asks about my math class and whether I finished that book I mentioned last time. His therapist must have told him that rebuilding trust means actually listening instead of lecturing, because he's trying to follow that advice even when I can tell it's hard for him. During one visit, he brings a card game we used to play when I was younger, and we sit there moving pieces around the board while the supervisor takes notes in the corner, and for 20 minutes it almost feels normal. I'm cautiously hopeful that maybe someday we'll have a real relationship again, but I'm not rushing toward forgiveness or pretending the past 3 years didn't happen. Miranda calls Mom one afternoon with news about the state's investigation into the Brotherhood of Purity. The authorities conducted interviews and reviewed the organization's materials, and while they couldn't shut the whole thing down because of religious freedom protections, they did establish new oversight requirements for any group running residential programs for minors. Now, these programs need mandatory reporting protocols and regular inspections, plus clear documentation that parents can't just ship their kids off without proper legal processes. It's not enough to dismantle the Brotherhood completely, but it's a start. Miranda tells us that our case helped establish precedent for protecting kids from coercive religious groups that hide behind faith claims while actually controlling and isolating teenagers. Mom thanks her and hangs up looking satisfied, like maybe all the fear and legal battles accomplished something beyond just our family. 6 months pass with Dad attending therapy every week and showing up for supervised visits where he asks about school and my friends instead of measuring my clothes or quoting scripture about female submission. The court reviews his progress and the therapist's reports, and the judge decides to allow unsupervised day visits while I still live with Mom full-time. The first unsupervised visit makes me nervous enough that I almost cancel, but Mom encourages me to try to promises I can call her anytime if I need to leave. Dad picks me up at noon and drives us to a casual restaurant near the mall, and we sit across from each other in a booth with menus between us. He asks what I want to order and then starts talking about his job and some project he's working on. Normal conversation that doesn't mention modesty or the brotherhood or anything about the past. We eat burgers and fries, and he tells me about a coworker's ridiculous email chain, and I share a story about a group project at the school where nobody did their part except me. It almost feels like having a father instead of a warden, and when he drops me back at the apartment, he says he had a good time and hopes we can do it again. I say okay and mean it. I start volunteering with a local organization that helps teenagers dealing with family control issues, using my experience to mentor others and help them understand their rights. The first time I walk into their office for training, I meet 3 other volunteers who are also survivors of controlling families, and we spend an hour sharing pieces of our stories, while the coordinator explains how the mentoring program works. They pair me with a 15-year-old girl whose parents are monitoring her phone and threatening to pull her out of school if she doesn't obey their rules about dating and clothing, and I recognize so much of my own fear in her face. I tell her about CPS and school counselors and legal aid attorneys, practical information about systems that can help if you know how to access them. Turning my pain into something useful feels healing in a way therapy alone couldn't accomplish, and the other volunteers become friends who understand what I've been through without needing long explanations. I'm building a support system beyond just Mom. Mom's divorce gets finalized after months of paperwork and negotiations, and the settlement includes Dad paying for my therapy sessions and contributing to a college savings account. She comes home from the final court date looking exhausted but relieved, and that weekend she tells me she's been seeing someone new. His name is Robert, and he works at her office, and she's been taking things slow because she wanted to make sure he respects boundaries and treats her as an equal. I meet him a few weeks later when he comes over for dinner, and he's quiet and kind and asks me questions about school without being pushy. Watching Mom laugh at his jokes and lean into his side on the couch, I see her reclaiming her own autonomy and becoming herself again instead of living in fear. Her happiness inspires me to keep growing into myself too. For my 17th birthday, I decide to celebrate by going to the beach with friends, and I spend an hour in a store trying on swimsuits until I find one I actually like. Mom drives me and 3 friends to the coast on a sunny Saturday, and we spread towels on the sand and run into the waves. My hair blows loose around my shoulders in the wind, and the sun warms my uncovered arms and legs, and I feel present in my body in a way I haven't since I was 13. Mom takes photos of me smiling with my friends, the ocean behind us and my hair wild and free. That night, I send one photo to Dad with a note saying I'm happy and safe, and he responds an hour later saying he's glad and he's proud of me. It feels like progress. Small, but real. The therapist eventually clears Dad for overnight visits after reviewing another 3 months of supervised sessions and progress reports. I pack a bag nervously for a weekend at his new apartment, throwing in comfortable clothes and my phone charger and a book in case things get awkward. Dad's moved to a smaller place across town, and when I walk in, I notice immediately that all the Brotherhood pamphlets and materials are gone. The walls are bare except for a few normal pictures, and his bookshelf holds regular books instead of religious texts about female purity. We spend the weekend watching movies on his couch and cooking meals together in his tiny kitchen, and he doesn't try to control what I wear or comment on my clothes or suggest I should cover up. It's not perfect because there's still tension and unspoken history between us, but it's peaceful. Sunday afternoon, when he drives me back to Mom's apartment, he says he's working on being better, and he hopes I can see that. I tell him I do see it and I appreciate him trying. At the school, I'm doing well in all my classes, no longer distracted by constant fear and surveillance. My grades improve, and I join 2 clubs and start thinking seriously about college applications. I'm considering studying law or social work because I want to help other kids navigate the systems that can protect them when their families become dangerous. Talia calls me into her office one day and hands me an envelope, and inside is a recommendation letter she wrote for my college applications. I read it standing there in her office and start crying because she describes my courage and resilience and ability to advocate for myself, and seeing my experience reflected back as strength instead of damage makes something shift inside me. She hugs me and says she's proud of how far I've come. 1 year after the emergency hearing that changed everything, Jamal schedules a final visit to close our CPS case. He sits with Mom and me at our kitchen table and reviews his report, noting that I'm safe and stable and doing well in the school, and that Dad has successfully completed all his therapy requirements and demonstrated appropriate parenting during visits. Jamal tells me I should be proud of myself for speaking up when it mattered most, for trusting the adults who could help and being brave enough to ask for protection. I am proud, and I also feel grateful that the systems actually worked when so many people say they don't. Jamal closes the file and shakes both our hands before leaving, and Mom and I sit there in the quiet apartment feeling like we've finally reached solid ground. I log into the forum where I first posted about my situation a year ago, and write a follow-up describing how things turned out. I explain the legal protections that worked, the therapy that helped both me and Dad, and the slow rebuilding of family relationships on healthier terms, where I have autonomy and choices. I emphasize that escape was possible, and that institutions like CPS and family court and legal aid can help if you know how to access them, and you're willing to push through the fear of reporting. The responses start coming in within hours, people thanking me for the hope and asking specific questions about how to start their own processes. Some share their own updates about leaving controlling situations, and I feel connected to this community of survivors who understand what it takes to reclaim your life from people who tried to erase you. Mom and I start building something new together, piece by piece. Every Friday night we pick a movie neither of us has seen before and make popcorn with too much butter, sitting on our worn couch in our small apartment. We try cooking new recipes on weekends, laughing when things burn or turn out weird, and it doesn't matter because we're choosing what to make and when to eat it. We talk about taking a trip somewhere next summer, maybe to the beach or the mountains, places where we can just be ourselves without looking over our shoulders. One evening while we're washing dishes together, Mom stops and tells me she's sorry she didn't act sooner, that she was so scared of losing me that she almost lost me anyway. I dry my hands and tell her we both did the best we could with what we knew, and what matters now is that we're free and we're together. She hugs me tight and we stand there in our tiny kitchen that smells like dish soap and feels like safety. On a regular Tuesday morning, I wake up and pick out jeans and a t-shirt I chose myself, pulling them on without anyone measuring or inspecting. I brush my hair and leave it loose around my shoulders, looking at my uncovered face in the mirror. I grab my backpack with homework I completed on my own schedule and walk to the school in the early sunshine, feeling the breeze on my arms and face. I have a plan for my day, for my semester, for applying to colleges next year, plans I'm making based on what I want and what I'm good at. Life isn't simple and some scars remain, days when I still feel the weight of all those layers or hear Dad's voice in my head, but I'm moving forward on my own terms now, and that's everything. That's the story for today. Thanks for being part of it, because your time here honestly makes every upload worth doing. I hope it left you smiling or at least a little more hopeful. Subscribe so we can share more good moments together.